I woke up the day after my wife's funeral to the sound of my son sliding a cardboard box across my kitchen floor. Inside it, buried under her reading glasses and her church bulletins, was a small wooden jewelry case I had never seen before. When he pried it open and found nothing but a folded bank slip inside, he laughed. Figures. Mom kept an empty box locked up like it was the crown jewels. He tossed the slip onto the counter like it was trash. Dad, we need to talk about the house. Realistically, you can't stay here alone. But it wasn't empty. Taped to the underside of the lid, where his careless hands never thought to look, was a second piece of paper folded into a small square. What was written on it, in my wife's careful handwriting, told me my 44 years of marriage had been hiding a secret that was about to save my life. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments what town you're calling in from tonight. And if you believe a mother's love finds a way to protect her family even after she's gone, hit that like button for her. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 63 years old, and for 35 of those years I drove a delivery route out of a freight depot in Toledo, Ohio. My hands are cracked from decades of gripping a steering wheel through Midwest winters, and my back aches in ways a young man wouldn't understand. But I never complained, because every mile I drove put food on the table for my wife, Diane, and our son, Bradley. Diane was the steady one. She kept our books balanced down to the last dollar, clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper, and never once asked me for anything more than what we had. We lived in the same small brick house on Larkspur Avenue for 31 years, the one we bought when Bradley was still in diapers. 3 weeks ago, Diane collapsed in the kitchen while making dinner. The doctors called it a stroke. There was no warning, no goodbye. Just an ordinary Tuesday evening that ended with paramedics in my living room and a silence in that house I still can't get used to. Her slippers are still by the back door. Her handwriting is still on the calendar, reminding me of a dentist appointment she'll never make. Bradley is 39 now. He works in commercial insurance downtown, the kind of job where he wears a different tie every day and talks about portfolios at Thanksgiving. His wife, Courtney, sells real estate on the east side of the city, the expensive side, the side with iron gates and circular driveways. They didn't come to the funeral to grieve. They came, I understood within 48 hours, to assess. Courtney walked through my house the day after the service with her phone out, snapping pictures of the crown molding in the backyard, the way a person photographs a listing. Bradley kept saying the word practical like it was a spell that could make my grief disappear. Practical to sell the house, practical for me to move somewhere smaller, practical for them to handle things so I wouldn't have to think. I was sitting in my recliner, the one Diane always threatened to throw out and never did, when Bradley set that little wooden box on my lap and told me it was time to start going through her things. I hadn't even wanted to open it yet. I wasn't ready. But Bradley wasn't a patient man, not since he married into money he didn't grow up with, and he pried the lid open himself before I could stop him. Diane never locked much in our house. She trusted people, sometimes more than she should have. But that box had a small clasp, and when it finally gave way, there was nothing inside but a single folded bank slip from someplace called Meridian Trust. I had never heard of it in my life. Bradley barely glanced at it. Some old passbook thing, probably from before you two got married, he said, setting it down like it didn't matter. Figures. Mom kept an empty box locked up like it was the crown jewels. He walked off toward the kitchen to find Courtney, complaining loudly that the house smelled like mothballs and needed to be aired out before any potential buyers walked through. I sat there a long moment after his footsteps faded, staring at that little wooden box. Diane didn't do things without reason. 44 years of marriage teaches you the rhythm of a person, the small habits that mean something even when they look like nothing. She never locked a box for no reason. My knees ache something fierce these days, arthritis mostly, but I pushed myself up out of that recliner and walked over, running my thumb along the inside of the lid the way I used to check the undercarriage of a delivery truck for a loose bolt. That's when I felt it. A slight ridge, a seam that shouldn't have been there. I peeled back a thin strip of felt lining and found a folded square of paper taped flat against the wood, hidden so carefully that a man in a hurry, a man who never really looked at his mother the way she deserved to be looked at, would never find it in 100 years. My hands shook a little unfolding it. Diane's handwriting filled the page in blue ink, small and careful the way she always wrote. Walter, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Bradley has already started moving fast. I need you to trust me on this, even though none of it will make sense yet. Go to Meridian Trust downtown and ask for a man named Preston Vale. Tell him the account number ending in 4000 471. Do not tell Bradley or Courtney anything about this. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. I love you more than these years could ever say, and I am sorry I kept this from you, but I did it to protect us. I read it twice, then a third time, my heart hammering against my ribs like a fist against a door. Meridian Trust, an account number, a warning not to sign anything. My Diane, who reused tinfoil and drove 20 minutes out of her way for cheaper gas, had a secret bank account and a name to go with it. It didn't add up, not by any math I understood. And for the first time since she died, I felt something other than grief creeping into my chest. I felt afraid, and beneath the fear, something sharper. Suspicion. I folded the paper back up small and slid it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart, and I didn't say a word to anyone. That night I lay awake in our bed, the empty half of it still smelling faintly of her lavender lotion, turning the note over and over in my mind. Do not tell Bradley or Courtney anything. Why would my own wife warn me away from our son? I told myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a modest little retirement account Diane had squirreled away as a surprise for our 40th anniversary. Something sweet and secret the way she always liked to do things. But the warning stuck in my chest like a fishbone. Diane didn't scare easily. She'd faced down a hospital full of doctors when Bradley had his appendix out at 9 years old, without so much as raising her voice. If she was scared enough to hide a note in the lining of a jewelry box, then something was very wrong. The next morning, Bradley showed up before 8 with a folder of real estate paperwork under his arm and a coffee for himself, none for me. Courtney trailed behind him in a blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment used to. "Dad, we really think it's best if you come stay with us for a little while," Bradley said, settling into the chair across from me like he was closing a deal. "Just until we get the house sorted out. You shouldn't be rattling around this place alone." I understood immediately it wasn't an offer born out of love. It was a maneuver. Get me out of the house, get the locks changed, get Diane's belongings boxed up and hauled to Goodwill before I had time to think straight. But sitting there with that folded note burning a hole in my shirt pocket, I realized something. If I refused, I'd never learn what Diane was trying to warn me about. If I said yes, I'd be inside their world, close enough to watch, close enough to understand. So I did something I hadn't done in longer than I could remember. I lied to my own son's face. "You're right," I said, letting my voice tremble just slightly, playing up the exhaustion in my bones that wasn't entirely fake. "I don't think I can be alone in this house right now." Courtney's smile flickered for half a second, quick and satisfied, before she smoothed it back into practiced sympathy. "We'll take good care of you, Walter," she said. I almost believed she meant it, if I hadn't already learned to distrust every word that came out of her mouth so easily. I packed one suitcase, careful to tuck Diane's note into the lining of my own shaving kit where nobody would think to look, and I let them drive me across town to their house in Sycamore Heights, the neighborhood the rest of us on Larkspur Avenue used to joke about, the one with the manicured hedges and the security gate that took 2 tries to get right. Their house was enormous, 5 bedrooms for 2 people, with a 3-car garage and a kitchen island the size of my old dining room table. They set me up in a guest suite on the ground floor, tucked away near the laundry room, close enough to keep an eye on but far enough to be forgotten. For the first 2 days I did exactly what a grieving, frail old man would do. I stayed quiet. I ate what was put in front of me. I let Courtney fuss over pillows and blankets like she was auditioning for sainthood in front of an audience only she could see, and I watched. What I saw in that house over those first few days made the grief in my chest curdle into something colder. Delivery trucks came by nearly every afternoon, dropping off boxes from stores I'd never even heard of, the kind of packaging with tissue paper and ribbon instead of bubble wrap. One evening I watched Courtney unbox a handbag that cost, I later learned from the receipt she left crumpled on the counter, more than I used to make in 2 months on the road. Bradley ordered takeout from a steakhouse downtown 3 nights running, eating it standing up at the counter while scrolling through his phone with a tight, worried expression he thought nobody noticed. They were spending like people who had all the money in the world, but underneath it, I started to see the cracks. Bradley's phone would buzz with calls he wouldn't answer, his jaw clenching every time a certain ringtone went off. Twice I heard him arguing in hushed, frantic tones behind the closed door of his home office, something about a margin call and a name, Danforth, that he spat out like a curse. Courtney drank more wine each night than the night before, and she'd taken to snapping at the housekeeper over things that didn't matter, the way people do when the real thing eating at them can't be said out loud. On the 4th night, I heard Bradley on the back patio. pacing, his voice low and desperate into his phone. I stood just inside the sliding glass door, in the dark, listening the way I used to listen for a rattle under the hood of my truck, trying to locate exactly where the trouble was coming from. "I told you I'm handling it," he was saying. "The trust transfers next week. I just need my father to sign the paperwork. He'll do whatever we tell him. He trusts us." My stomach dropped clean through the floor. Trust transfer. Paperwork. My father will do whatever we tell him. I backed away from that door as quietly as my aching knees would let me, and sat on the edge of my guest bed with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. Diane's warning wasn't about some sweet little secret retirement fund. It was about this. Whatever Bradley and Courtney were planning, it involved paperwork with my name on it, and it involved money that apparently ran through an account I'd never even known existed. I waited 3 more days before I made my move, playing the part of the tired, cooperative old man the whole while, letting Courtney walk me through brochures for senior communities that all looked like hospitals dressed up in nice curtains. I learned their patterns. Bradley left for the office by 7:30 most mornings. Courtney had client showings most afternoons that kept her out of the house for hours at a stretch. On the 5th morning, once I heard Courtney's car pull out of the driveway, I made my way down the hallway to Bradley's home office. The door he always kept locked, the one Diane's note had somehow known to warn me about before I even knew it existed. I'd spent 35 years driving trucks with finicky locks and stubborn cargo doors, and it turned out a home office deadbolt wasn't much of a match for a coat hanger and a little patience I'd learned from an old buddy of mine who used to work security. My hands shook the whole time, less from the arthritis and more from the fear of getting caught. But the lock finally gave, and I slipped inside. The office was immaculate, all dark wood and framed diplomas, but the top drawer of his filing cabinet, when I finally jimmied it open too, told a very different story than the one Bradley presented to the world. Inside was a thick folder labeled Danforth Capital, and inside that, page after page of loan documents, wire transfer confirmations, and a letter on aggressive legal letterhead threatening foreclosure on some property I'd never heard of unless a payment of nearly $2 million was made within 30 days. My son, the one who drove a car worth more than my house, was drowning in debt so deep it made my head spin. And clipped to the very back of the folder was a single sheet that stopped my heart cold. It was a Meridian Trust account authorization form, the same bank name from Diane's note, with a line at the bottom for my signature, my name typed out in full, and beneath it, in tiny print, I had to squint to read, a clause granting full power of attorney over the account to Bradley Higgins. They hadn't just been hoping I'd sign something. They'd already prepared the document, ready and waiting, needing only my signature to hand my dead wife's secret account, whatever was inside it, straight into the hands of a son so desperate for money, he was willing to forge his way there if I refused. I photographed every page with the disposable camera Diane always kept in her purse for emergencies, one I'd found tucked in my suitcase without ever remembering packing it, as if she'd known even that detail from wherever she was watching. I put everything back exactly as I found it, locked the drawer, and made it back to my guest room with maybe 4 minutes to spare before I heard Courtney's car in the driveway. I sat on that bed with my pulse hammering in my ears and understood, finally, the full shape of what Diane had tried to warn me about. She hadn't left me a mystery for the sake of mystery. She'd left me a map, because somehow, some way, she had known exactly what her son and daughter-in-law were capable of, long before I was willing to admit it to myself. That night, the temptation to march into the kitchen and throw those photographs down on the counter nearly overwhelmed me. I wanted to watch Bradley's face crumble, wanted to ask him how he could look at his own father and plan to forge his signature over a debt he'd created himself. But 35 years of hauling freight teaches a man something about patience, about knowing when to push through a storm and when to wait it out. If I confronted them now, with nothing but photographs and no understanding of what was actually in that Meridian Trust account, they'd simply deny everything, shred the paperwork, and find another way. I needed to know what Diane had actually done. I needed Preston Vale. The next morning, I told Courtney I wanted to visit Diane's grave, alone, and needed to borrow the car for an hour. Grief is a door nobody questions too hard, and she handed over the keys without so much as blinking. Instead of the cemetery, I drove downtown to the glass tower that housed Meridian Trust, my hands sweating against the steering wheel the whole way. The lobby was hushed and expensive, marble floors and hushed conversations, the kind of place that made a man in a worn flannel jacket feel distinctly out of place. I gave the receptionist Preston Vale's name and the account number ending in 4471, the way Diane's note had instructed, and watched her expression shift from polite indifference to something sharper, more careful, the moment she read the numbers back to herself. I was led into a private office within minutes. Preston Vale turned out to be a man about my own age, silver-haired, with the kind of steady eyes that come from decades of keeping other people's secrets. When I told him my name, he didn't reach for a keyboard or a form. He reached instead for a small locked drawer in his own desk and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Diane's handwriting. "Your wife came to me 8 months ago," he said, his voice low and careful. "She told me she suspected something wasn't right with your son's finances, and she wanted to protect what little you both had left before it disappeared into whatever hole he'd dug for himself." My chest went tight. 8 months. Diane had known for 8 months, had walked around our kitchen every evening for 8 months making dinner and asking about my day, all while quietly building some kind of fortress around us that I never even knew we needed. Preston explained it slowly, patiently, the way you'd explain something to a man still catching up to a truth that had already reshaped his whole life. Diane had moved nearly everything: our modest retirement savings, the small life insurance payout from her own mother years back, even a portion of equity she'd quietly borrowed against our paid-off house without my knowledge, into an irrevocable trust, structured so that only I, and I alone, could access or dissolve it, and only in person. With a specific verification phrase, she'd left with Preston. No power of attorney, no authorized representative, nothing Bradley could forge or coerce his way into. She had built it, Preston told me, specifically to withstand exactly the kind of pressure I'd just spent 8 days watching Bradley and Courtney apply. She said if anything ever happened to her, her son would come for it fast, and she wanted to make sure there was nothing left for him to take by force. I sat in that office with my dead wife's letter unopened in my lap and understood, for the first time in my 63 years, the true weight of what quiet devotion actually looked like. It didn't announce itself. It didn't ask for credit. It simply worked, patiently, in the dark, protecting the people it loved, long after it had any right to still be trying. I opened her letter right there in Preston's office, my hands trembling so badly he offered to step out and give me privacy, which I gratefully accepted. "Walter, my love, if you're reading this, then Preston has already explained the trust, and I imagine your head is spinning. I should have told you months ago, but I was afraid of what it would mean if I was wrong, afraid of the fight it might cause between us and Bradley if I accused him of something I couldn't yet prove. I started noticing things last spring, calls he wouldn't take in front of me, questions about how much equity we had left in the house, a folder I found by accident in his car with a lawyer's letterhead I didn't recognize. I am not a suspicious woman, Walter. You know that better than anyone. But a mother knows the sound of her child's voice when he's hiding something, and Bradley's voice had that sound in it for months. I could not stop him from making whatever choices he's made with his own life, but I could stop him from taking ours along with him. Everything we worked for, every mile you drove, every dollar I saved, it's safe now, waiting for you, and only you. I am sorry I carried this alone. I did it because I loved you both too much to watch either of you get destroyed by this. Take care of yourself. Eat something other than sandwiches. I love you, always. Diane." I sat there and wept in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the funeral, not just for losing her, but for 31 years of underestimating exactly how strong that quiet, coupon-clipping woman I married had always truly been. I left Meridian Trust that afternoon with copies of everything: the trust documents, Diane's letter, and a plan finally forming clear in my mind. I didn't go back to Sycamore Heights right away. Instead, I drove to the county courthouse and, using the photographs I'd taken of Bradley's Danforth Capital folder, filed a formal report with a financial crimes detective named Ruiz, a sharp, patient woman who listened to my whole story without once looking at me like a confused old man wasting her time. She explained that forged power of attorney documents, especially ones prepared before a signature was even obtained, could constitute fraud, and that Bradley's debt situation, layered against a dead mother's trust he had no legal claim to, painted a picture worth investigating properly. She asked me to go back to the house, act normal, and wait for her call. Those were the longest 4 days of my life, sitting across the dinner table from my own son and his wife, watching Bradley slide that Meridian Trust authorization form in front of me on the 5th evening with a practiced, gentle smile, telling me it was just a formality to simplify things, while Courtney hovered behind him with a pen already uncapped in her hand. I looked down at that document, my name typed out where my signature was supposed to go, the same document I'd already photographed and handed over to Detective Ruiz days before, and I did something I never thought I'd have the nerve to do to my own child. I smiled back at him, picked up the pen, and said, "Of course, son. Whatever you need." I pressed the pen to the paper and, in the unsteady, deliberately shaky hand of a grieving, arthritic old man, wrote out a signature that wasn't mine at all. A signature I'd practiced a dozen times in the bathroom mirror that morning specifically so it wouldn't match, buying just enough time for what was already in motion. Detective Ruiz called the next morning while Bradley was at the office. Two unmarked cars pulled into the driveway of that big house in Sycamore Heights by 10 a.m., and I watched from the front window as Courtney's face drained of every ounce of its careful composure when the detectives introduced themselves. By noon, Bradley had been brought in for questioning downtown, the Danforth capital debt, and the falsified authorization documents laid out in front of him by people who weren't nearly as easy to charm as his own aging father had once been. I learned later, sitting in Detective Ruiz's office giving my full statement, that Bradley's financial hole ran even deeper than the folder had shown, nearly $3 million in debt from failed investments he'd hidden from everyone, including his own wife, and that the plan had always been to drain whatever remained of Diane's accounts to buy himself just enough time to keep the whole collapsing structure standing a little longer. Bradley called me from a payphone 2 weeks later, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was a boy, afraid of thunderstorms, asking if I could ever forgive him. I told him the truth, that forgiveness wasn't something I could hand him on a phone call, that it would take time and honesty in a way our family had apparently been missing for longer than I wanted to admit. Courtney, it turned out, hadn't known the full extent of his debts either, and in the weeks that followed, their marriage came apart nearly as fast as his financial house of cards had. I moved back into the house on Larkspur Avenue not long after, back to Diane's slippers by the back door and her handwriting still on that calendar, and some evenings I sit in that old recliner she always threatened to throw out and I talk to her like she's still in the next room, telling her that her trust held, that her trap worked exactly the way she built it to, that the quiet woman who reused tinfoil and drove out of her way for cheaper gas turned out to be the strongest person either of us ever knew. I think about that little wooden box more than I probably should, about how close I came to letting Bradley toss that folded bank slip into the garbage without a second look, the way he tossed so much of his mother's memory aside in those first grief-soaked days. If there's one thing I'd ask anyone watching this to carry with them tonight, it's this. Look closer at the people who love you quietly. The ones who don't announce their sacrifices, who don't ask for credit, who simply show up every single day and do what needs doing without ever making it about themselves. They are often carrying far more strength and far more love than any of us take the time to notice until it's almost too late. Diane spent 44 years loving me in ways I'm only now starting to fully understand, and she spent her last 8 months quietly building a fortress around our family that saved us both from a storm neither of us saw coming. If this story moved you tonight, tell me where you're watching from, and hold on a little tighter to the quiet ones in your own life. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now.